Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. Today, I want to offer a critique of metacognitive therapy. So metacognitive therapy has gotten very popular and is gaining a lot of ground these days. And that's, in my opinion, a very good thing. So first, let's start off with some basics. And I might just start with the conclusion. I love metacognitive therapy. I really like the framework. I think it's really useful. I think it's the best thing that's come out of Western psychology in terms of helping people reduce their psychological suffering. And it's very similar in principle, if not in style, to what I teach in the psychological illusion model. So if you've studied the psychological illusion model, metacognitive therapy is the framework and way of working that probably comes the closest to what I do, which is kind of interesting because I only started looking into metacognitive therapy about a year and a half ago. So first, some basics, and I'll offer what I consider to be the strengths and the weaknesses of metacognitive therapy according to my understanding of it. So this is, of course, according to me and not necessarily some objective truth. So metacognitive therapy is created by Adrian Wells and is a third generation cognitive therapy. So the original behaviorists were like the first generation, and then you had Albert Ellis first with rational emotive behavior therapy, and you had Aaron Beck with cognitive behavioral therapy. These guys, originated these ways of working in the 50s. And then as the third generation, you have metacognitive therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. Now, if you look at the second generation cognitive therapies, the CBT and Albert Ellis's REBT, a lot of it revolves around helping people change the content of what they think, to discover discover thinking errors, black and white thinking, personalizing, overgeneralizing, emotional logic, these sorts of thought distortions, helping people identify that and dispute it and often replace it by more rational and realistic ways of thinking in combination with behavioral interventions. The difference with metacognitive therapy and ACT is that it's less about working on what you think, or necessarily that much about how you think either, but more about changing your relationship to thinking itself. So one reason why I really like metacognitive therapy is that if you were to ask many of my clients who have been depressing severely or anxietizing severely or have been very obsessive or compulsive and who've suffered a lot and who no longer do, if you were to ask those people, what's different for you, you would very often get the answer of, you know what, I used to have so much thinking around that, and now I hardly think about it anymore. So they think less. They have less thinking, less rumination, less worry. And what the metacognitive therapists do is that they don't encourage people to work on their thinking. There's not an emphasis on the past. So one huge strength is that a metacognitive therapist is hardly interested in your story at all. He or she may give you a few minutes to kind of give a brief outline as to what's going on, but there's very little interest in hearing the client's story or exploring the client's past. there's no selling of a victimhood identity, meaning there's an acknowledgement that people may be victimized. You could get mugged, you could get run over by a car, or get an infection, or someone might, commit fraud against you. But there's no encouragement of a victimhood identity. There's none of the peddling of the traumatologists that says that memories are stored in the body and that you have to work through thoughts and process emotions and give a lot of meaning and significance to it. There's none of that whatsoever. It's just about helping you more clearly see thoughts as thoughts, and develop a different relationship to your thoughts and feelings. So the answer kind of is, what do you do with painful emotions? As little as possible. They come and go on their own accord, but it's very often a lot of our solutions and our analysis and rumination and worry and threat monitoring and unhelpful coping strategies that kind of keep these thought feeling loops going. In some ways, metacognitive therapy reminds me of the three principles, or the teachings presented by Sydney Banks, a Scottish mystic who had a couple of enlightenment experiences. Of course, he had a way more spiritual bent, but the similarities is that Sydney Banks was one of the first people to, as far as I know, who said, look, you don't have to work on your thinking. You don't have to process your emotions or explore your past or you can be helped to see that thoughts are essentially thoughts. And Sydney Banks also very much promoted the idea that there's an intelligence behind life that works to balance our systems, essentially. So the idea being that if you cut your finger or you scrape your knee, there's a healing intelligence inside of you that works to balance or fix that. And that if you pick on the wound all the time, that's going to get in the way of that. And the same idea being the case with thoughts and feelings, that there is a inner intelligence that's working to kind of balance us and allow thoughts and feelings to pass, but that it is us not seeing thoughts as thoughts and trying to work on thoughts and reframe thoughts and adding a lot of meaning and significance to it that very often blocks this kind of natural intelligence in balancing us. So what something else that's very interesting too in metacognitive therapy is that in the original cognitive therapy and also in rational emotive behavior therapy, you have this ABC model where A is an activating event. Something happens, someone says something, someone cuts in front of you in traffic or whatever it might be. B is your beliefs, your interpretations, the kind of thought distortions that you create out of that. And then C are the emotional consequences. Now, most people are very concerned with A and C, and the cognitive therapists tend to try to get people to see the B, to see that they're storytellers. They're making a story about what this means. It's their interpretations that, for the most part, they're experiencing. And then it's about disputing and challenging and replacing the thoughts with more realistic thoughts and stuff like that. What metacognitive therapy does, and of course, metacognitive kind of means thinking about thinking, right? The assumptions you have about thinking. So it's work on that level. It's not so much trying to change the thoughts and the feelings themselves, but it looks at your metacognition, the deeper assumptions you have about thinking itself, and to change your relationship to that and to explore the kind of validity of those ideas. So in this model, A is a thought, a so-called triggering thought. I would argue that there are no such things, but in this model, A is a triggering thought or feeling. And then you have M, which is the kind of metacognitive assumption that A, the trigger thought, seems to trigger. And that metacognitive assumption might be something like, so let's say that the trigger thought is, shit, what if I fail again at this task, right? The metacognitive thought might be this assumption that says, if I worry enough and cover all the bases, then I can make sure that I don't fail, right? And then that might inspire what's called CAS, or the cognitive attentional syndrome, which is either worrying, rumination, threat monitoring, or unhelpful coping strategies. So that belief, for example, that kind of meta assumptions that if I only worry about this or really think hard and long enough, I can make sure I don't fail. That might then trigger a lot of worry and a lot of threat monitoring, which then is kind of like what you feel at sea. So a cognitive therapist might be more likely if the cognition is, let's say that there's an exam coming up that's A, and then B is the, oh shit, what if I fail again? That's going to mean I'm a loser. This is like the thought distortion of personalization, for example. The traditional cognitive therapist might help the person dispute that thought and look for evidence of whether it's really true or other interpretations. Whereas the metacognitive therapist might be more working on the level of, okay, so when this what if I fail again, it means I'm a loser thought appears, how did you respond to that? How do you relate to it? What meaning do you give it? What assumptions do you have about what it means to think that, or what you have to do if such a thought appears? And it's more working on that metacognitive level. And this has been my observation over the years too, of course, is that thoughts and feelings in and of themselves are neutral. But it's our relationships to them, it's our identification with it, and what we think it means to have a particular thought that determines whether we suffer or not. So this is, for the most part, I think, a big improvement over traditional cognitive therapy. There's a kind of three-layered cake, so to speak, in this model of how the mind works. The first kind of layer is just automatic thoughts. All the thoughts and emotions that occur during a day. And the second level is like the strategy level, and this is where you get these processing strategies of worry and rumination and threat monitoring and unhelpful coping strategies. So just to be a little bit specific here, worry is thinking about a future. So it's kind of like what if type thinking. What if this? Rumination is mostly kind of rehashing the past. It's more why. Why me? Why did this happen? Spinning that loop all the time. And the whole idea in metacognitive therapy is that it's kind of everyone has negative thoughts. Everyone buys into their bullshit from time to time. But not everyone ends up depressed and anxious. And one idea here is that it's the amount of thinking, it's the amount of rumination and worry that becomes a problem. So these kind of strategies are worry and rumination, and they kind of block our inner system's capacity to kind of self-regulate. Then you have threat monitoring, which is kind of often being like hypersensitive to what we think and how we feel and what's going on and looking for danger. And so, for example, if you have a fear of flying client, which I had yesterday, it might be, well, I check the weather all the time before a flight, so that I can get a seat, where the weather is good, or I'm going to fly only in mornings or evenings, so I don't really have a perception of the height, or I need to sit in a, and this also blends into unhelpful coping strategies, like I need a beer before my flight, or I need to sit in a particular chair, or I need this routine, or I need this book to distract myself, and all of this kind of contributes to the threat monitoring, which kind of reinforces the notion that these thoughts are dangerous and they need to be controlled and they need to be fixed. And that's kind of what gives it its significance. So let's see here. What else? Um, there's quite a bit of emphasis on so-called thought fusions, which I also think is good. So a thought fusion might be, because a particular thought appears, I have to act on it. You see this very often with compulsions, for example, or obsessive thinking, or if this thought appears, I have to act on it. So it looks as if the thought has some inherent power to have to make the person act. There might be a thought event fusion. Like if I think about the plane crashing enough, if I have enough catastrophic thoughts, that's going to make the plane crash, or that's going to kind of influence what actually happens, right? So, I mean, other thought fusions might be, because I have this thought, I have to feel a particular way, or I have to ruminate about it. So there's some interesting ways of kind of helping people explore and challenge and dispute these thought fusions. When you look at, I kind of lost my train of thought a bit, because I talked about this three-layered cake. So the first level being the kind of automatic thoughts, the second level being these strategies of unhelpful coping strategies, threat monitoring, worry and rumination. And the higher level being kind of the metacognition, the positive and negative beliefs we have about thinking itself. So a positive metacognitive belief about worry, for example, might be, as I said earlier, that if I just worry enough and I cover all the bases, then I can be guaranteed to not make any mistakes. Or if I just ruminate enough, I'll get so depressed that I hit rock bottom, and that will force me to break out of this, for example. So people might have positive metacognitive assumptions that kind of drives these strategies. They might also have negative metacognitive assumptions, such as there's nothing I can do about my rumination or my worry, or if these thoughts of hurting someone appear, I'm destined to act on them, or if I don't get control of these thoughts, I'm going to go psychotic or lose my mind, or I'm just going to break down, right? So a good metacognitive therapist will help people become aware of these things and in a kind of Socratic type dialogue, help people explore it. So there's also some emphasis on exposure therapy, as there is in all kind of cognitive therapies. But this is more often more short term and more about exploring the metacognitions and revealing them. Other factors why people may be doing these strategies is, of course, because they don't really notice that they're thinking to begin with. They're not really seeing thoughts as thoughts. So they're constantly stressed because there's this loop going on. So when people don't see thoughts as thoughts, they're way more likely to ruminate and try to solve non-events as if they're events. So a metacognitive therapist may help people to change their relationship to thoughts with what they call attentional training and mindful detachment, in a sense, where you just kind of observe the thoughts without trying to change them or fix them in any way whatsoever. So these are in my opinion the really strong suits of what they're doing in metacognitive therapy. I should say I've never studied metacognitive therapy formally. I have a couple of people I'm mentoring who are heavily into metacognitive therapy and who have studied it formally, so I've had conversations with them. And I've read 4 books on the topics, and I recommend these. So this is the Norwegian edition of An Introduction to Metacognitive Therapy by Adrian Wells and Peter Fisher. It's kind of academic, not the best one. This is a Norwegian edition of a Danish psychologist, which has written a book called Live More, Think Less. There's an English edition to this. I really recommend it. It's a really good book. I read this book, Talk Less About It, by a Norwegian psychologist. Don't think it's translated into English. And then, of course, you have the classic Metacognitive Therapy for Anxiety and Depression by Adrian Wells, which also is a really good book that goes into strategies for OCD, PTSD, depression, anxiety, these sorts of things. So what are, in my opinion, some of the weaknesses in metacognitive therapy? Well, I would say, and this is just a light criticism of this first point, but it is the whole therapy thing and the whole mental illness frame, which kind of primes people to think of this as a disease or as a disorder that needs to be fixed or treated. Now, these people are psychologists and psychiatrists, and they kind of work under the psychotherapy banner, so they probably don't have that much choice in it. But I as I've said in other videos, I think mental illness is a myth. There really is no such thing. I think the therapy frame is a big mistake. It makes helping people way more difficult than it needs to be. Although the metacognitive therapists tend to do what they can simultaneously to kind of disabuse people of these notions, right? The second thing is that it comes across to me as very cognitive, the whole approach, right? In terms of like detached, I don't know I can't remember if they use the term mindfulness actually. Let's see here, if I can find it. Well, the kind of detached mindfulness of just kind of watching your thoughts, the kind of Socratic dialogue, very useful, very good. simultaneously very cognitive in its approach. They also seem to be a little bit down on meditation. These authors seem to criticize mindfulness and meditation and to make a very concentrated effort to describe the kind of exercises that they do as something entirely different. I think they're mistaken on this. Meditation doesn't have to be something that's done for a long time or in a spiritual context. You can develop specific meditative exercises that help people develop the kind of capacities and insights that you're looking to do in metacognitive therapy. So, for example, the capacity to see thoughts as thoughts to begin with, helping people develop concentration and sensory clarity, can really help people to become way better at actually seeing thoughts, as mental events that you don't really need to fix or invest anything in. So a kind of tailor-made meditation practice may be very useful in facilitating that, even if you don't do the practice to change the thoughts and feelings in of themselves. There are many different types of meditation, and they have different intentions. The kind of attention training that they do, where they orient between different sounds or change rapidly between sequential sounds, or try to be aware of multiple sounds at the same time, to kind of train this executive flexibility. These are also exercises done in various forms of meditation. Now, what Wells tends to emphasize is just in a kind of detached way observing thoughts and seeing them as thoughts, and thereby not being the thought, but being the person who kind of is aware of the thought. So this is one way to change your relationship with thinking, is that kind of disidentification, even though in meditation you wouldn't sell the notion that you're the person who's aware of thoughts, because that's just another thought construct. It would more be that you are the awareness or the consciousness or the being that is aware, that knows the thoughts, or in which the thought arises, or the being expresses itself as a temporary thought, right? So that's one way of doing it, but there are other ways of helping people to change their relationship to thoughts and feelings. So sometimes, and you end up in the same place, instead of like gaining distance from thinking, you can allow yourself to completely go into, for example, a felt experience, to completely feel it and simultaneously observe it and track it, so that you're so close to it, you're so intimate with it, that the sense of a self separate from the emotion just completely dissolves. There's just the experience. Being able to have a full experience of thoughts and feelings allows them to arise and release spontaneously. It's a more visceral approach, which leads you to the same place. But I've discovered in working with clients that some people respond way better to this. Some people respond way better to a more experiential, more felt sense, helping people to distinguish between felt sensations and storytelling, for example. And to do that, you really need to have visceral felt experiences. That can be a great way of helping people become better at just allowing thoughts and feelings to come and go. Of course, in meditation, the bullseye of meditation, in my opinion, is to help people see that the notion of a stable, permanent, separate self is an illusion. So you can, in dealing with thoughts and emotions, kind of just watch it. You can also have a full experience of the emotion, which takes away the sense of the separate self. But you can also help people explore the alleged self that the thoughts and feelings revolve around, and to help people to have a realization that the self that the thoughts and feelings imply and on behalf of which they arise is not really there to be found. That's really liberating because most thoughts are self-referential. They're about me and enhancing me and protecting me and covering my weaknesses and stuff like that. So moving in the other direction and helping people to see the illusory nature of the self on whose behalf the thoughts and feelings arise can be very liberating, also with clients in a so-called psychotherapeutic context, because thoughts and feelings only really produce suffering when we identify with them, when it looks like me or I or mine. This is something that metacognitive therapy does not at all seem to cover. Something else too, consciousness itself is not actually hurt or enhanced by any thought content. Consciousness itself is already free of whatever issue or thought or feeling that arises. And there's an enormous benefit to helping people realize the nature of being or consciousness itself. This is something also that metacognitive therapy doesn't seem to focus on at all. Finally, sometimes people can be so stuck in thinking that it's hard to reach them in a kind of cognitive way. So sometimes more behavioral interventions or tasks or breathing or help, even a more CBT-like approach can be a good first step to help people to realize that these are just mental events in the mind. So I wouldn't completely discount these other methods. It's kind of unclear when I read the books whether Adrian Wells and his colleagues think that metacognitive therapy replaces kind of all other models, or whether they're kind of open to, this is one way of working and these other frameworks may on occasion be useful. It's kind of hard to know that just based upon reading the books. There's also very little emphasis on artistry, the way it looks. As I said, it's very cognitive. It's very little emphasis on humor or paradox or provocation or drama. You can use artistry and humor and paradox and provocation to help people kind of have insights into these things. And this might just be a stylistic thing, but it doesn't seem as if metacognitive therapy emphasizes that much, which is kind of, in my opinion, not a good thing, a limitation. The material I've seen and read about seems to focus a lot on, of course, changing your relationship to thoughts and feelings, which is basically it, right? But a lot of emphasis on depression and anxiety and OCD, PTSD, these sorts of things. I haven't seen anything about psychosomatic issues or allergies or migraine or chronic pain or relationship issues or these sorts of things. So I'm unclear about how Metacognitive therapists would go about working with those things just based upon the books and the conversations I've had with people who do practice cognitive or metacognitive therapy. But anyways, if you are just an individual who's curious about psychology and you want to help yourself, I really, really recommend this as a self-help book. This is a Norwegian edition, but it's a Danish psychologist called Pia Collison. It's translated into English. The title is Live More, Think Less. This is a really, really good book as a self-help book to help you kind of apply this stuff with yourself. It has a lot of useful strategies, and I especially like the stuff they have about postponing or scheduling rumination and worry, even though that's not unique to metacognitive therapy. Milton Erickson and Jay Haley and people like that used to do that too. If you're a therapist or a coach, I also recommend that book, but I also really recommend that you get metacognitive therapy for anxiety and depression. This really is an improvement, I think, over the typical frameworks that people use. So I highly recommend that you look into it. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts if you practice metacognitive therapy, to what extent you may agree or disagree with my take. If you think I'm wrong or mistaken, let me know. Also like to remind you that my next seminar in the psychological illusion model is coming up March 25th and 26th, 2023. If you go to provocativehypnosis.com on the seminar page, you can get information or sign up. Also know that I see clients from all over the world on Skype. So if you're looking to explore something or learn more about how the mind works or make some sort of change, get in touch. Once again, thanks for listening.